The next project in Tech Math, we're going to be learning how to write checks and balance a checkbook. The goal of this video is to give you a quick outline on what a check is and how you have to write a check. I know many of you probably have written some checks before, but the goal of this video is to make sure that we're writing the checks correctly. So even if you've written checks before, this video still might end up being worthwhile to you. Now, there are 9 main components of the check, and we're going to go through each of those components one at a time. The first one, of course, is the date. Now, when we're writing the date, it is very important to know that the date can be today's date, it can be tomorrow's date, it could be yesterday's date. It's actually not illegal to write any date in this box. However, if I wrote the date of 9/28, that means that the person who gets this check cannot cash it until this date. If I wrote the date of 10/12, the check cannot be cashed until that date. And the reason why people do this, we call this post dating. The reason why people do this is if your bank account doesn't have enough money at the day that this check is written and someone cashes it, you're going to be responsible for the money even if it brings your account below zero, which incurs a lot of penalties. So maybe I'm going to move it till this date when I get paid, and now I don't have to worry about my account going to zero. You'll have to do that a couple times in the project to make sure that your check is always written on a day when you have enough money. You hear in movies a lot where they'll talk about, like, don't cash that until next Friday or something like that. They usually say it as a joke, but that's really what they're meaning. The next line is paid to the order of. This is where you're going to write the name of the person that you're sending the check to. So let's say I'm sending this check to my landlord, which is Barb Gottlieb. And so when I write the check, I want to make sure that I write everything as far to the left as possible so that we can't insert another name. So a lot of times people will write a line in here because if I wrote Barb Gottlieb and Danielle Hansen, all of a sudden Danielle can now cash this check. So it's important to make sure that you write your names as close to the left as possible and to X out any extra space so new people cannot cash it. The third thing right here is the account or the amount that the check is being written for. So for example, if this check is written for $43 and let's say 41 cents, I would write it in this fashion here. Sometimes people will write it as 41 over 100 in this spot in the corner, but I don't think it's necessary to do it. I think it's just fine this way. Part 4, this is where the amount of the check needs to be written in words. And it's very important for these words to be spelled correctly. So if I'm doing $43, so I have $43, and I write and this is where I'm going to write it as a fraction, which is 41 cents. Now, if they wrote something extra behind here and they wrote like plus $100, this check would actually be written for that amount. And you have to be really careful. If these two amounts don't match up, the bank might be suspicious. But if someone wrote this, plus $100, and then they went up here to this corner and they put a 1 right there, all of a sudden the check can be written for a different amount. So once again, when you're done writing as far left as possible, you want to then scratch out whatever's left over. Now you notice it's got this dollar symbol right here. I always go $43 and then I scratch out the dollar symbol. But it's really okay either way. Number 5 is the memo. The memo can be written for any legal purpose. There is nothing in here that you can write that would make the check void, right? I could say being a loser, and that doesn't change the amount of the check at all. The only point of the memo is for me, the person who's writing it, to remember what I wrote it for. So if I wrote this for rent, right, it does not matter, and Barb Gottlieb can cash this check for any purpose, no matter what the memo says. So the memo basically can be left blank no matter what. Part 6, this is your signature. And your signature should always be written in cursive of some kind. and your signature should always be as consistent as possible. So it would be a bad idea to dramatically change your signature for some reason. Make sure you try to write it as close to humanly possible, because if someone steals your checks, your signature is really the only means of proving that you didn't write them. Only 3 things left. This right here is the routing number. This means basically nothing to you, but the routing number is what bank made these checks. So that bank is responsible for making sure you have enough money in it. That connects to the next part, which is your account number. So if you're ever learning how to do direct deposit or something like that, the middle number on your check is actually the account number for the account that your bank came from. The final thing, and actually the most important thing probably on any check, is the check number. So any number of a check that ends in 1 means this is a new check. You can choose your checks to start at any number as long as it ends in 1. So my first check on my last account was 701. So if you're ever at a cashier place and you see a 1 at the end of the check, that means you should be a little bit more careful about that check, because it's the first one on the account. People frequently will, if they're going to write a fake check, will write a check on the first one of a new account. So that is the basic outline of the check. There are 9 main components. What you are going to be doing is you are going to be writing checks for your project, and we have them out blank like this. Obviously, your name, address, city, state, you can leave that blank or fill it out once, but every other part of the check needs to be filled out either on paper or on your computer. You can do either or. I do not have a problem with either. So let's take a quick look at what the assignment is. So the check writing project is right here. Your goal is to balance your checkbook while writing appropriate checks. You must have an updated balance sheet and checks for each payment. So I would do an Excel document as well as the check writing from the other page. So if I received a check from work that's worth $1,200, that is plus $1,200. So my total is now $1,200. I don't need to write that check. It's only writing checks that I have received. So then I write $350 worth of checks for the C-store. This is check 1. And I'm going to lose $350, and then I have to balance my checkbook. My big warning on this: you cannot write a check that would put you into the negative. So there are a few checks in here that you will need to post date until after you've been paid again. Certain checks can be post dated and certain checks cannot be. So we will talk about this more for the time that I am in class this week, but this is due at the end of the day, Thursday.